Yeah. I mean, it's when you look at the structure of procurement teams, and you look at the way that, for example, procurement qualifications, how where
Mhm.
they come from and how they're standardized or not, and how they're managed. What do you see as? Do you have any particular views on the evolution of procurement as a function, and do you think it will become
Sure.
more standardized? Because
Um,
just add some context to that. Sometimes you'll see stuff that you might assume sits within procurement, but it sits within operations, or
right.
it sits in a completely different area. Whereas I feel like the relevance and importance of procurement is being more recognised now, but I don't really have enough. Um, Personally, I don't have enough knowledge
Yeah.
to see where that's going to go to.
Yeah. So yeah, so I have a network of about 67 or something like that, either CPOs, heads of procurement, equivalent kind of folks, right? So I talk to a lot of fairly senior people. And the impression I get is that after the pandemic or during the pandemic, folks finally in the C-suite finally realized that we don't just buy stuff, right? That there's actually this foundational skill set that's needed and that's enterprise enabling. But not every organization is structured in a way that leverages that. So what I mean is CPOs oftentimes are not a member of the C-suite. They actually report to a CFO or a COO or whatever, right? Um, and it's different between direct and indirect. So direct, meaning like manufacturing kind of stuff. You're buying parts or whatever that go onto a product that you sell versus indirect being, things like IT and marketing and finance and HR and stuff like that. Even if you're a finance company, like I am, a lot of um, a lot, even if you're a finance company, the products and services we sell use technology, and so there are revenue generating things, but you buy it like it's indirect because it happens to be IT or services or whatever, right? So on the um, direct side, typically their supply chain organization is really worried about parts and services or parts, I should say, and assemblies and components and stuff like that being a certain place at a certain time with certain quality, right? So it's a very kind of old school, orchestrate the parts so they get where they need to be when they need to be so you can build something. The more strategic they are in that area is a little different than when you're talking sort of the indirect side. The indirect side tends to be where you're doing these services deals, outsourcing, vested kind of deals, stuff like that. That's really enterprise enabling. And um, so, one of them is value added and necessary, but it's tactical. The other one is more strategic, if that makes sense. Now, there are strategic components to direct, don't get me wrong, like business continuity, like making sure you have the rights, like you look at Nike, right? And the way they design their stuff, their strategic suppliers actually not only help them design their clothing or shoes or whatever it is that they're selling, but they actually are part of like their C-suite, or at least it used to be anyway. Um, the I don't know the current CPO, but in the CPO a while ago. Those strategic suppliers were in like C-suite meetings with the CEO and stuff, figuring out, okay, like how do we do this thing? So, that shoe that the technology that like weaves it in one thing, there's no seams, that was invented by one of their suppliers. Um, you know, so not saying direct isn't strategic. It certainly can be, but the part of how the sort of level of a procurement organization is who do they report to and what's their charter, right? So there's sort of the tactical, procure pay operational stuff. And then there's sort of these, sort of strategic sourcing and, kind of business enabling stuff. So if you're buying things that are driving revenue, if you are having a seat at the table as, kind of a trusted advisor sort of role where you're helping with business strategy and that sort of thing, it's very different than if you're just sort of doing the keep the lights on, run and maintain, make sure you don't run out of, whatever it is you need kind of stuff, right? And so, it's kind of a long way of saying it's not just what you call the team, but how they're structured, who they report to, and sort of what their ability to influence is. And the more as a procurement professional you can influence the business, the more value you can create. Because a supplier can come in and give you something super innovative that you can't take advantage of because you can't convince the C-suite that it's the right thing to do. Classic example, Boeing Employees Credit Union. So it's a credit union in the US. Got hundreds of thousands of customers that started kind of with Boeing employees and then relatives and whatnot. And anybody can join it now. Well, they were offered online banking and ATMs and stuff like that back in like the very, very early 80s. One of the first companies that was actually offered that by a supplier. They were one of the last adopters of it. So way after, other banks and financial institutions. And the reason was their business model was about customer intimacy. And so the CPO and the CIO at the time said, "Hey, there's this really cool thing, and it allows, our clients to have access to their money, from when they go shopping in the grocery store." And the C-suite's like, "Why would we do that? We've had relationships with these customers for 2, 3 generations. They come in, they have lunch with their personal banker, we have a cup of coffee, building all these relationships. Why on earth would we want this technology? It makes no sense at all." Right. And they couldn't sell it because they couldn't convince the C-suite that the business model of customer intimacy could still be done remotely. And obviously, every banking institution does online stuff now and has for years, right? But they had a chance to be one of the first adopters, and instead they were one of the last adopters because procurement didn't have either the seat at the table or didn't have the ability to influence the C-suite. So even though this great idea, they couldn't pull it off, right? And it was a supplier-driven innovation thing that disrupted the entire industry, shifted from brick and mortar banking to, online and ATMs and all that stuff. And it was transformational in the industry. We know in retrospect, they should have been an early adopter, but they weren't, right? So think about the modern example of if your procurement team sees this really cool thing from a supplier or whatever it is, can you, air quotes, sell it to the C-suite because you can demonstrate you understand the business as well as any business leader does, and you can see the value in it, and you can see the risk, issues, and opportunities, and it's something that's worth that attention and conversation.